The next area we want to cover in the development of early medieval Europe will be to take a look at what we just saw with the development of the manorial or the feudal economy, that agriculturally based production system in the countryside where the vast majority of the people are involved directly in agricultural production, in part because the productivity is very low and that there's going to be a need to have more productivity and more efficiency within the economy of the farm of agriculture before anybody could be involved in creating larger cities. For example, if you remember a couple of chapters ago, Rome as a city was at one point roughly 1 million people, and it had to have massive importation of food, massive importation of foodstuffs from other places where they had huge surpluses back into Rome to feed the population. That same kind of thing is going to happen in Europe. Until there is enough food production to have more stability and allow people to leave agriculture and work in urban areas, there's not going to be an urban culture yet. They haven't broken through yet. But as we move through the centuries here, one thing that's going to start to happen is that there's going to be improvements in the way in which they use draft animals, for example. They're going to come across and learn better technology about things like horse collars, where they can hitch up a team of horses or oxen to a plow, a very heavy plow, and have the weight distributed onto the shoulders of the animal as opposed to the neck. Also, some other involved ideas about using teams of oxen and redistributing the burden on them. Lots of different things involving the creation of the stirrup. In other words, lots of very simple innovations on how to maximize both human and animal power in agricultural production and in many of the windmills and other things that are being created. Very simple technology, but nonetheless, it's having higher productivity and better efficiency in the production of food and the food supply being able to be transported by water into other urban areas as needed. What that means then is that many of the cities of Europe that are going to start to grow, and they'll be relatively small to start, and they will grow in time. Some may start again on the ruins of older Roman cities, for example. London, for example, is going to be a city that will be building on an older settlement and over time pile up. Some cities will be like that. Others will be new, created in different areas by different landlords for different reasons. But the idea here is that the agricultural production, being able to have surplus food because of things like a better horse collar, better plows, and that sort of simple agricultural technology will allow people to have higher food productivity, and that means people can specialize. But how are these cities going to be created? This is a cathedral in a French city called Laon, okay? And well, let me tell you a little story about how the community, the city, was created. There is a thing called the commune. All right, the idea here is this. In the Middle Ages, there were many business people and other entrepreneurial folks who were looking to create their own economic opportunity. And in the old system that was created and controlled by the feudal landlords and in the manorial system, notice that there really wasn't a place for the entrepreneur, the businessman, the trader, the banker, right? That the old sort of idea that may have been expressed in some of your reading was that medieval society was divided by those who work, those who fight, and those who pray. That there was the peasant and the serf class who did all the agricultural production. There was the warrior class of knights and the nobility who did the fighting, and then there were the churchmen who prayed for all. That's a very old-fashioned understanding of how society is developed and how it is organized. Where in there is the role for the entrepreneur, the businessman, the urban merchant, the artisan, the shoemaker, the mason, the carpenter, the roofer? So what we have to have then in the development of Europe is a change from the older mentality and into a new one. And that's where there's the creation of what is called the commune. You'll see within the idea commune the idea of common and also the idea of community. What's going to happen is this. Many people who are looking to buy their independence and get free of the local landlords are sometimes they're secular landlords, noblemen or aristocrats of some sort. Sometimes they're churchmen who own the territory where they live. Regardless of whether it is a secular or a religious landlord, there are people who want to gain their own freedom. And one of the classic cases of how one of these deals went wrong is from the city in France. All right. In this city in France, the local people had pooled their money together to create a community. They're going to buy their own freedom. They're going to create a corporation. They're going to create themselves as a giant business. The business is going to be a free city. That's their goal. They're incorporating to create a city. They go to the bishop, they pay the bishop for their freedom, they sign and seal all the documents, he takes the money, but they don't get their independence, they don't get their freedom. They don't get to create their own municipal charter, have their own independence, their own legal systems, etc. They supplicate, they ask for the bishop to follow through on his word. He doesn't exactly follow through. So what happens is, in 1116, the local community tracks down the bishop, breaks into his palace in the city, find where he is hiding, pull him out, and in public chop him into pieces and throw him into the street in pieces for the pigs to eat. Now, the moral of the story here is this. This was a business deal gone wrong. The commoners had purchased their freedom to set up their own city, their own corporation from the bishop. The bishop took their money, but did not give them their freedom. And after many obligations where they went back and forth trying to make him obey, eventually what they had to do was essentially go and assault him, murder him to make their point. So the message for the next bishop is, you better give us our freedom. And also the message here is, in this kind of business deal, just because this man was a bishop did not mean he had any special status. These people saw him as a cheat, as a business deal gone wrong, and his status as a bishop of the Roman Catholic Church did not save him. He was executed by their means, by a sort of vigilante justice, if you want to think of it that way, but they thought they were doing what was necessary to get their point across. Brutal, but true. What's also going to happen in these emerging cities is the people who buy the freedom, right? The people who put their money on the table to purchase the land and purchase the obligation for the local landlords to leave us alone, they're going to be creating themselves into what are called guilds. All right, think of it this way. If you're an investor in a company and you're going to buy your freedom as a shoemaker in this new city, you're going to put your money where your mouth is, you're going to invest. Do you want to see other shoemakers come in and enjoy the same freedom to operate as you did, although you paid for it and you created it? No. Many of the early cities are going to create what are called guilds, and that's a fancy word for a monopoly, really. What they're going to do is they're going to make sure the people who created the city, the commune, the community, who bought in with essentially their money to take a share of the corporation of the city, are not going to allow free competition. They're not going to allow other people to come in and undercut them in pricing and not have taken all the risks that they did to incorporate and fight the local landlords, sometimes church and sometimes local aristocracy. These cities are usually then going to be founded by investors who are going to make sure that they have a control over what happens inside the walls of their town, and part of that is to not allow significant competition. They're going to have a monopoly history. What's also going to be interesting is that in these cities, doing banking, doing credit, doing any kind of business transaction is going to be very difficult unless there is coinage to be exchanged or forms of credit somehow. And this is where it's going to be very interesting. The Europeans, for the longest time, have run an economy either using silver and gold coins or jewels as actual value currency and exchanging them, or have been using the system in many of the countryside villages that's common. You essentially work for your living and your labor is equated. There's not an exchange of gold and silver coins. It's, I exchanged my labor of so many hours working on your farm for the ability to work on your farm and also have some strip of territory on your farm that I use to grow my own food. A cashless kind of economy. So far in the kind of ideas we have here, where's the origins of something that you might call capitalism? Hard to see, because the prerequisites aren't there yet. A cash-driven or banking and credit system economy still hasn't been created yet. But they are going to be starting to create these ideas, especially with long-distance trade, and the idea of it's dangerous to spend time and energy and money to carry large bunches of gold and silver from town to town. But what if you wrote a letter of exchange or a letter of credit and had it transported from one place to the other? Now, this is a depiction of some business activity in the next couple of centuries, but nonetheless, money changers, banking, credit systems, they're becoming more sophisticated. There are large families that are starting to specialize in long-distance trade and long-distance banking. And instead of having to carry a bag of gold and silver from, say, Rome to Paris, you can instead carry a letter inside a very close network of bankers where you could take that letter of credit and change it into money someplace else, and then later on that money would be transferred back by letter, by credit. We're creating a more sophisticated system in Europe of transferring wealth from one place to the other. Now, it's granted on a very close system of trade and people who know each other and families who know each other, who know signatures and secret codes, so that when they're exchanging these letters of credit, essentially the beginnings of what you would think of as a check or a checking system, they are a very closed network of folks. They're not just randomly taking a piece of paper from anybody, but it is encouraging easier long-distance trade and the accumulation of more wealth. Also notice that with the accumulation of large amounts of wealth, you'll be amazed to find out that the politicians and the kings and queens of Europe are also very interested, because when they need money for financing a war and they need financing now, they need to go to the people who have that gold and that silver, and that's going to be these large banking families. Take a look at the development of some of the early medieval concepts of the economy. Take a look and see if there's also some test questions that can help you comprehend this emerging area of medieval Europe.